Let's make some modular sewers, perfect for D&D campaigns, or in my case a scenario under the city of Osgiliath with Sam and Frodo. These are fully modular, expandable and packed with detail. Best of all, the techniques are simple, but the results look incredible. Let's get going. The sewer system we'll be creating is based on the battle games in Middle-earth magazines, which are part of the main series on my channel, where I'm going through each magazine, painting the figures and building the terrain. It calls for 12 modular pieces, but of course it's expandable to make as many as you want. I'll be mainly focusing on using foam and my hot wire cutter to prepare all the pieces needed for the build. I'm using foam board for the bases and XPS foam for the walkways and walls. 12 6" by 6". These will form the bases for our sewer pieces. We'll need multiple walkways. Each flagstone is going to be 1" square, perfect for D&D. We'll need 15 6" by 2" walkways, 2 4" by 2", 19 2" by 2", and we'll need 21 walls which are 6" by 3". To shape the archways that divide each section, I cut 2" squares and trace around one shape I've already made freehand. You can freehand pretty much any shape you like. My only advice would be to not make the bottom too large, as you want your models to be able to pass by. We'll need a lot of these, 54 in total for my terrain pieces. I cut them thin so I can get about 3 out of each piece. With the prep done, let's get to texturing. Regardless of the piece, the method will be the same. For the walkways, I'll be marking 1" squares. I make the first mark with a shallow cut into the foam, then run a pen through those gaps to widen them. Next, get a rock and add random texture by hitting and rolling the rock. Make sure to rotate the rock in your hand and use different parts to avoid repeated patterns. For a few of the top stones, I add in a few cracks for damage. For the sides of the walkways, I make a thin cut for the top slabs and then mark roughly at the halfway mark, and then just mark and texture like we did for the top of the walkways. For the walls, you can make any size stones you want. I split mine into 1" width and 15mm high because I like to confuse myself by mixing imperial and metric measurements. Mark and texture in the same way. For the archways, I mark a similar pattern to the wall and again texture them. You might notice later a few of my archways broke, but I decided to channel my inner Bob Ross and called it a happy little accident and made it work anyway. For some variation on the straight pieces, I create some stairs. Apologies for the horrendous shot here, but I marked the shape of the stairs and cut them with the hot wire cutter. I had a small fishing holiday with the family in between this build, so I took all the foam with me and my daughters helped over 2 evenings marking and texturing everything. When we returned, I said good morning to the cows and got to putting everything together. Let's have a look at each modular piece and what we'll need to make them. We'll need 5 straights, and for those we'll need 2 walls, 2 long walkways and 4 archways. One of my straights I added in those stairs along with 1 walkway piece and the stairs. We'll need 2 T-Junctions which have 1 wall. You'll want a long walkway, 2 2" walkways and 6 archways. I'll be making 2 corner pieces which have 2 walls, 1 long walkway, 1 4" walkway and a 2" walkway with 4 archways. We'll only need 1 crossroads, which are really simple, they just need 4 2" walkways and 8 archways. For the entrance and exits to the sewers, we'll use 3 walls, 2 long walkways and a 1 2" walkway, along with the archways for the exits. Prior to assembling, I do a first layer of grade paint as it's easier to paint them all prior to assembling. I took a trip to B&Q who mix up paint to match any colour, and I got them to mix up a tester pot of my favourite grey, and using a big makeup brush, we paint everything. Now time to put those sewers together. I'm using my small hot glue gun as it doesn't quite get as hot as my main one, which gets so hot it melts the foam. The hot glue gun is very quick and doesn't take long to get all the pieces together. It's worth noting that at this stage I know I'm going to be doing a resin pour later, so I make sure there is a good line of glue towards the centre to avoid it leaking later. Next I want to add some texture, so applying Mod Podge into the edges and corners and applying sand to that. Again, I'm trying to add enough to seal up the edges for the resin pour later. Now time for the paint job. Let's do another layer of grey to cover the sand and look for any blue foam still exposed after the first coat. To add a grimy, dirty look and add the first start of colour variation, I make up a batch of wash, which is just a few different paints, namely browns and a black, along with water and some washing up liquid to help it flow into the recesses. This gets applied over everything and left to dry. Now for my favourite stage of any terrain project, the dry brushing. I take some light grey and using a big makeup brush I remove most of the paint and lightly brush over the terrain. This hits the high points and leaves our dark and dirty wash in the recesses. Next I want to introduce some variation to the wall colours by randomly placing patches of browns, greens and a bit of purple in random patches on the sewers. I use my airbrush and randomly spray light coats of the various colours. This yellow olive is such a nice sickly looking green. I apply that to the side walls of the walkways and into the centre where the water would have stained the stone. I add some depth into the corners with black pigment powder for the ambient shadows. The sewers look great so far, but resin water will bring them to life. I'm using masking tape to block each end. I'm not doing a thick layer as I want the models to be able to walk through the sewers without looking like they're walking on water. I only mix up around 100 ml of resin to do all these pieces, and I add a little yellow, green and brown resin ink. I pour some in and then rotate the piece to get it to all the edges, and before that dries I add some of these blended leaves. I picked these up from the forest outside the William Wallace Monument in Stirling. Amazing place, if you ever get the chance you should definitely visit. While that's drying, let's make some simple wooden bridges that can be used throughout the build. Take some balsa wood and texture the wood with a wire brush, cut into planks and glue together. I make sure the bottom supports are close to the 2-inch gaps that will be all over. That way you can move them and reuse them anywhere on any piece. Painting the wood was simple, brown base, and I applied a black oil wash to dull it down. Now with the resin dry and the masking tape is removed, and we have all our sewer pieces built and ready for playing. But I wanted to try something I've never done before with some OSL for torches. I take some Imperial Fist contrast paint, which has surprisingly good coverage for a yellow, and I spray that into a circular pattern. Then I spray from the location of the flame to hit the edges of the archways. To the edges of the yellow I spray some bright red speed paint. Then some nuclear sunrise closer into the flame. For the brightest spot, I paint some whiting first and then layer with Imperial Fist. I want to add a torch for the wall, and to hold it my wife suggested some staples, so I took 3 and bent in the middle. This was such a great idea and adds a nice bit of decoration for really no effort. For the torch itself I cut out the end of a cocktail stick and glued on some cotton wool and painted it. And we've finished. Our modular sewers are complete. They look absolutely incredible on the table. They're versatile for DnD, MESBG or really any dungeon setting, and they were a lot of fun to build. Thanks to everyone who supports me with a comment, like, share and special thanks to my patrons. Until next time, happy modelling.